welcome to another Thursdays with Third Path. And this one, like all of them, I would argue, is going to be pretty amazing because last week we had our virtual summit and over 50 people came who are so smart about work-life integration. And collectively, we looked at the idea of how do you build connection in a hybrid workplace? How do you do mentoring? And how do you do work distribution effectively in a hybrid and remote workplace? And boy, do we have some answers for you today. But what I want to start with is a really important point, something you probably already know, which is how important leaders play a role in our solutions today and the philosophy of that leader and the manager's philosophies. And I want to give you an example that really helps illustrate this. Let's pretend you're in a 200-person workplace. All of you work on site, and 10 of those people are managers, but 3 of them are not so great. Well, in that workplace, because everybody's coming on site, everybody gets to know who the good managers are, who the bad managers are, and they kind of make some plans accordingly. Now, think about this in a hybrid workplace, especially a hybrid workplace that hasn't done a good job of building connection. Think about those teams who've got that bad manager. Their experience is pretty much their whole concept of what that workplace is like. Their dysfunctional team represents the whole organization to them because they haven't got a perspective of what the larger organization is doing. So what do we learn from this? In hybrid and remote workplace, who your manager is makes even a bigger difference. It always is important who your leadership is and who your manager is, but it really makes a big difference in a hybrid and remote workplace. So keep that in mind as we talk about these different concepts today. To get us started, I'm going to have Melissa Davidson, who is there and my right-hand person at ThirdPath, talk about building connection in a hybrid workplace. So let's bring her on. Melissa, so glad you're here. What an amazing event that was. And I'm so glad we're talking about building connection because as we know, when you build great connection in your workplace, in your teams, guess what happens? You get better work done. So what were some of the big takeaways that you learned in the discussion groups that happened around building connection?
I just have to echo, it was a really, really great and powerful event. I suspect that what I'm going to share as far as takeaways from building connection, I suspect there's going to be a theme throughout. And I think the biggest takeaway is around intentionality. In order to build connection in hybrid and remote workplaces, there has to be a strong intention around how we do this. It is hard to stay connected. Particularly, I think, at Third Path, we've always been remote. So we are adept at creating connection because it's just the culture of our workplace. I think if organizations are newer to hybrid and remote work, this is just a heavier lift. And we've talked so many times before about pre-COVID and post-COVID, and this whole the whole concept that if we were all sort of shoved into remote. So we all had to make up solutions at the time. And I think a lot of really great solutions came out of necessity. So, I mean, I'd love to share some of the takeaways. There were some really great takeaways, but again, my theme throughout really is around the intentionality. This takes work. It is not simple. You don't have water cooler time, right? So we have to kind of create that virtual experience. So, one of the things that you, again, have already touched on is the strength of leadership in situations like this. So what are leaders doing to create connection? One of our groups really started to talk about just because you have virtual meetings doesn't mean everybody has their cameras on. And there's a time and a place for a camera being off, but there's also a time and a place for a camera being on. And just being able to see each other's faces and see each other's reactions and body language is very, very important. So one really simple building connection step is around, can we actually see each other? We also had some interesting feedback around the strategies for when meetings take place that should be in person versus what things can take place in a virtual setting. There has to be, again, that intentionality around we're all coming together to accomplish something specific. It can't be One of the participants had commented around, we come together for meetings, we take this extra time, and then it's not something that we needed to do in person. So what do you do when you're in person that makes it a different experience than when you're on Zoom? And there were some really interesting suggestions around that as well, that building in time to socialize and building in a fun way to socialize when you've come together in person is really critical. So what are some rituals you might have around that? And who is part of planning that? That shouldn't just come from leadership. Modeling it is great, but when you bring people together, how are you actually inspiring people to be engaged with one another? And I think ownership is a big part of that. There's one other thing that I'd love to share, which I thought was really interesting that came out of one of the groups, and that was, if you don't have a lot of connection in the workplace because you're hybrid and remote, you have to make some really intentional decisions outside of work on how you build connections so that you don't feel isolated. So what are we doing outside of work to make sure that at home we are building connection? There's no question it can be isolating to work in a remote work setting. I think some people love it. There really are the benefits around not like if you can fully disconnect, you really can get some good work done. But if you're fully disconnected, where are you getting that need to connect with other people fulfilled? So there again was this piece, a strong theme around intentionality, but intentionality on how you're connecting with others outside of work. So I'm going to take a pause there. I've shared a lot. I don't know if there are things that come up for you in hearing that.
No, it's really wonderful. And actually, when people listening in today, stay tuned for the very end. We have a leader who will be talking about how he's really figured out how to do hybrid work well. And he has once a month on meetings where they get together. And one of their rules of engagement is it needs to be a celebration with cake. So why are we celebrating with cake this month? And so they have some purpose for having cake each month, which I thought was pretty sweet. No, I think you've really hit some really important points. And I want to underscore that whole idea of, one, even in a fully remote workplace, we knew we had to physically get together in some sort of cadence that made sense. Um, and I like your idea of maybe getting input from your team about how to make that meaningful to get together. What can you do to make that meaningful and worthwhile for people to get in person? And I really think this small but important point about cameras on, I can't tell you how many people I've heard about workplaces where they have their team meetings where some people don't have the cameras on. And I can't quite imagine how they're building connection. And now I do know that sometimes that has to happen, but if the norm is cameras on, you're already building connection. Something else we do, I know you know this one well, is a routine around the start of a meeting where meetings aren't just about getting work done, but also about some sort of method for people to get to know each other better. Those of you who've listened into our events before hear that at our staff meetings, we often start with something called a new and good from work and life, so that we're getting to know each other, both about what are we working on and what's something going on outside of work that's also important. So great advice, Melissa. Thanks so much. Anything else you want to add before we go on to our next topic, which is going to be how do you mentor in a hybrid workplace? Any last thoughts?
Yes, I do have one last thought, and that is reflection. One of the pieces that came up was intentional reflection around how it's going and building that in regularly. Because what maybe worked 3 months ago is not working now. We didn't even talk about onboarding. There are so many pieces, but I think that opportunity to reflect and then to be flexible in making change on how you're addressing connection really will also make a big difference.
Yeah. Actually, that's the thing you're going to hear about today over and over again, intentionality and then reflection, because you can keep on experimenting and learning. I'll put a little shout out for all those people already doing work-life integration well. You're pretty good at intentionality and you're pretty good at reflection, because how else are you going to make your life work when you're balancing your work responsibilities and life responsibilities? And so you leaders should be looking for people who really do work-life integration well, because they're coming with good skills around intentionality and reflection. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks.
All right, we're here with Karin McGrath Dunn. She's one of those amazing ILAs who makes up the ThirdPath community and makes our work possible. ILA stands for Integrated Life Advocate. So someone who's really smart about helping people think in an integrated way. She's a coach, but she also helps run our whole life leader groups. Karin, I'm so glad you're here today.
Thanks for having me.
It was really fun to have that summit, and we really learned a lot about all these topics. I'm going to read some basics that we learned about mentoring, because what I learned was, like we've been talking about, some of this stuff where no matter where you work, you need to be thinking about these things, right? So with mentoring, what we learned was you need to be really clear about what the goals are and that those are communicated well. And, the purpose, is it for onboarding? Is it for professional development? Is it for cross training? Is it for career growth? Is there some reason you're doing the mentoring, and then making sure that you're actually going to work on accomplishing that? And then there's some mentoring basics. You can have more than one mentor. You can have a mentor for a short little bit or for a long time. And that there's going to be different styles in mentoring. Some are very planful. Maybe they even have a book list that they go through. Some are much more, shadowing. There's other styles that are out there. And I think two other really important points came up. One is that all of us can learn from others, especially in multi-generational workforces. So mentoring is never a one-way street. It's always something that we can learn from as well. However, and this is an important point, if you don't feel like somebody's investing in you, it's pretty hard to feel inspired about investing in others. So those are some basics. We can think about mentoring anywhere. But when we think about mentoring in a hybrid workplace, what did you learn in some of the conversations that happened around mentoring in a hybrid workplace?
Yeah, it was interesting. The group discussions went from informal to formal mentoring. Some of the groups really talked more about formal mentoring programs and some about informal. And there were mixed feelings about whether you needed to maybe touch in person with someone or not. My group in particular, I think most of us were thinking, that is completely possible virtually. I would say that bears out in global organizations. It's actually much more cost effective, practical, and inclusive to be meeting in a virtual way. And it creates an obstacle if you have to do it in person. And it also keeps you small because you've got to be with the person in your office. And those mentoring relationships in big organizations are so beneficial and intergenerational when they can cross departments and time zones and things like that. Lot of about purpose, meaning, and time for mentoring. Not only setting up mentees to understand what the expectations of a mentoring relationship are and the boundaries, but also how do you set up the mentors? And there was some discussion about you need to invest time in the mentors themselves and maybe explain or lay the foundation or have had them engage in mentoring so that they understand how to be a good mentor and what is kind of required of them. And that's really helpful too. But that there is a mutual learning opportunity here if you can create a safe environment between the two, where it's not just I'm the expert giving you advice and you're the young person in the organization. That is an artful kind of mentoring, one that requires intention. So there's that word again. Intention came up in all of these groups across the board: thought, care, design, thinking about the why. Why are we mentoring? It's all kinds of different ways of mentoring and all kinds of types, but sounds, at least from the group I was in, a lot of the discussion was around helping people who are in the organization a few years in or number of years in with things like job goals, leadership aspirations, as well as work-life flexibility requests and things like that. Coaching people on how to give the business case in the organization you're in order to really show the win for the organization and be able to get what you need in terms of your own work life or flexibility
goals or things you want to experiment with as a employee. So those are some of the things that came up.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was a cool
Ah,
discussion.
wow. It was, and you just reminded me of that global point of view is something we're going to talk about when we get to talk about work distribution. One of our amazing board members talks about the concept of remote first systems.
Mhm.
So even if someone's working on site, if you design systems to be remote first, they work remotely. That means no matter where someone works, they work well. Well, you just made me think about remote first mentoring.
For sure. And Jessica, it's funny that it reminds me of a group, part of our group discussion, but also, another piece, which is that goes hand in hand with being an inclusionary type of employer, because mentors can help uncover invisible information, but a remote first approach can also help uncover invisible information because it's explicitly there for people to find as they need it, when they need it. But that's another opportunity for a mentor, is just kind of like peeling back those layers of here's how it works at this place, or here are the politics you're not aware of, or, those kinds of things. So I love
Yeah.
the remote first mentoring setup. I
Yeah.
actually have a friend who does it for a global company, and I asked about their mentoring program, and that is
Yeah.
actually exactly how they set it up.
And speaking of uncovering unknown things, it really means that you're not thinking about just the people in your locale as possible candidates for moving ahead in their careers. You're thinking about the whole organization. So if many organizations have distributed workforces, many have people in all kinds of other countries, and there might be somebody in a country that is, I'm thinking about this woman who worked for an organization, and there was a woman in Mexico who she really mentored to become a significant leader in the organization because she could see her potential. And even though she was in a different country, she could really see the potential of this person to become an excellent, capable leader in their organization. What a benefit to the
You know,
organization to do that.
It's interesting. Brings up two other points that are important, I think, which is, it would be important in a mentoring program, especially a formal one in an organization, to ask people, is there somebody in our organization that you would like to be mentored by,
Oh,
or that you
nice.
would like to mentor? Because that will also give you indicators. And I think there's another really important piece, and that is psychological safety. Things like return to office are pretty controversial in some places, or very difficult for people to absorb. You really have to be careful that the mentoring relationship doesn't have a layered agenda around trying to help people like comply, but it's really a psychologically safe environment. And sometimes across time zones, that can actually be more likely to happen than within your own office. So
Wonderful. Hey, another amazing set of conversations that happened at our summit, and a great summary. Thank you very much, Karin. Really
yeah,
enjoyed that.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so our next topic is about work distribution. And I'll tell you, this is one of the more challenging topics. In fact, when we polled people about which topics they had the most information about versus the one that they wanted to learn most about, this is the one everybody wanted to learn more about. In fact, we know this is a topic that requires so much new information, new ways of thinking, that we're going to have a whole nother summit that looks at this stuff, in particular about the idea that there are going to be periods of time when there's episodic overwork, and how do you support people manage those times? And guess what? Life is also constantly changing. So people's ability to manage how much work they can do is shifting. And a really thoughtful manager gets really smart at how to manage both those things. So, how do we do work distribution in a hybrid and remote workplace? Let me give you a couple of key things that we learned. Again, we were just talking about this one. Start from a remote first approach. Develop systems that will work well wherever anybody's working. And to do that, you make them remote first. That means if someone's on site all the time, they can still use those systems. And if someone is fully remote, they can use those systems. You wanted to also develop the softer skills of people. As we started this discussion, who your manager is and how good they are at communicating, being empathetic, building trust is going to be critical to the success of your team and the ability for your team to function well. So it's not just about get the work done and measure that productivity. It's developing managers who have softer skills alongside their ability to think about how to get the work done well. There's also some work distribution basics. There's a difference between an easy to measure job and a hard to measure job. Easy to measure jobs mean that they're predictable and they're quantifiable and they're narrower in scope, probably. Harder to measure jobs are jobs that have changing tasks or hard to quantify tasks or multiple projects being managed at one time. And so you need to think about, as a work distribution challenge, is yours easier or harder to measure? And then come up with answers around how to solve distribution and measurement given that fact. You need to think about the type of work being done as well. Some work needs to be focused. Some work needs to be interconnected, done in coordination with others. Some of that collaborative work can be done on Zoom. Some of it needs to be done in person. So you need to think about that as you're designing your great work distribution systems. And then there's the process of, how do you actually want to distribute the work? The question we asked everybody was, how do you know what work you're working on? And how do you communicate that you got it done? Simple questions that really help us understand how work distribution is working. You also want to learn about the strengths of your team and really lean into the people with the skills for the different tasks that they're assigned. And you want to create a welcoming loop for feedback and ideas and dialogue, because your team members are going to have good ideas about how to maybe reprioritize things or get rid of low impact work so we can focus on what's highest impact. Last but not least, there's some ideas around, how do you actually keep in communication around what's getting done? Maybe you use team meetings or team huddles, project management. Maybe you have one-on-one meetings. Whatever method you use, and you'll probably use more than one method, you need to keep on reevaluating whether that method is really working. So there's a lot more I could say about how to do work distribution well. It is a topic we're going to keep on coming back to because it's such a big topic. And what I want to do now is invite an even bigger panel of people to help us think about that. Okay, you can see we've got everybody back for a really important discussion, and a couple of new people, including Christopher Veal, who's the vice chair of ThirdPath board, and we're lucky to have him. He is, you're going to see, very smart about all the topics you've just been hearing about. He's also a coach, and he works with organizations around these issues. And we've got Whit. He too is someone I've known for a long time as part of the ThirdPath community. First met him as an amazing dad. By the way, Christopher's an amazing dad too. And he also has helped us on a number of really important projects at ThirdPath, and is an amazing remote first leader. So we're just feeling really blessed with our group today. I wanted to start by just asking Christopher and then Whit, when you heard some of the ideas today, was there something that you felt like was missing or important to underscore? Christopher, let's start with you. What did you hear today?
Well, there's been lots of good things. I think a couple that stood out for me. One is the theme around communication. I think that's critical because it needs to be continuous and also open. And when I say open, that means particularly those leaders need to be open to hearing back responses that they may not want to hear when we're talking about things like remote work. With that also, I think it's a part of going beyond what we think is the stereotypical expectations around remote or in-person work. One of the things we discovered during the pandemic, if you go 2019, most organizations say there's no way we can operate remote. We will cease to exist. Everything will collapse and all the doomsday stuff that happens. I'm exaggerating to make my point, but then the pandemic hit and you saw that a lot of organizations were able to change, some more quickly than others. And I think what that really underscores is when you look at some of the research that's been done in the studies, employees were as productive and often more productive when they were able to work from home because it gave them some flexibility. I'll speak for myself. I had my own business and wasn't working for any at the time, but people that I know, being able to juggle things like parenting and family responsibilities around getting their work done, appreciated it because maybe they took time off during the day to pick their kids up from school, but then they would get back on afterwards and do the work. And so they were often more productive than they were being in a regular office 9 to 5. And the other bonus is you're not losing time commuting. Think about how much time, and I live in Southern California, so don't even talk to me about the traffic here. But if you're spending an hour or two in traffic one way to work, how much are you losing productivity there? So I think those are a couple of important pieces to emphasize as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Love that point. Uh, Lots more we can say about all of this. I agree. Whit, you've been listening in too. We are going to talk a lot about this in a second about how this really helps dads. You might have a thought about that, Whit, or some other thought that you heard that you wanted to underscore.
Can I just co-sign what Christopher said? That was
Yes, please.
I owe him $5 for that.
I echo all of that, and I including the fact that the conversations that we've already had earlier in this podcast have been fantastic. In terms of the remote mentoring relationship, that's all I know because we're entirely remote, and so I don't have something to compare that to other than my real life mentor relationships with that are not work related. I have found that they have happened organically in this remote environment that we're in, and there's a lot of blur between work and life, and I think a lot of that actually comes from me because I'm wired that way. I'm nosy about people's business, I guess. So, but I find that in a remote setting specifically allows for those water cooler moments that were mentioned earlier. That when you add those into a remote setting, it really connects people in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. So everything here has been fantastic. I echo all of it. And to your point about fatherhood, I know we're going to unpack that here in a second. Yes, the sky's the limit on that.
Yeah, yeah. No, it really is something it's huge change. And as you who've been following ThirdPath for 25 years know that we knew if we really wanted to make big change in the world around how we did work and how we did family, this could not be just a mom's issue. This had to be everybody issue. Whether or not you even have kids, this had to be something that we supported all people to think differently about. In fact, to that point, there's two things that were raised, and I'm going to see if anybody wants to talk about this, starting with either Christopher or Whit. One is, what about those managers who are struggling to be a manager in remote work or hybrid work well? I think something that came up at the summit was the idea that we shouldn't judge them so harshly, but instead maybe say, how do we help them feel like it's safe to say, I don't know how to do this. Can I be helped how to do this? If this is the future, how do we help them feel safe to speak up that they need to learn how to do mentoring, how to build connection, how to distribute work and understand what people are doing? Anybody have ideas about how to help those managers? Maybe we don't. That would be okay too.
I can certainly jump in for a second. One thing I want to emphasize in what you said, and I believe Karin brought up earlier, is the psychological safety is a critical piece. And if leaders don't feel safe saying, I don't know, they're not going to. And so they'll continue doing the things that aren't effective, and you're going to see good talent walking out the door. So I think if leaders at all levels can create more psychological safety and walk their talk, you'll see that happen. I think it also emphasizes, and it's similar because if you look at a lot of ways that we often promote managers in organizations, they do well as an individual contributor and we make them a manager, but we don't always then say, here's the skills to be a leader. And so whether it's remote or in person, I think we need to make sure that organizations are investing in how are they giving people those talents, those skills, the things they need so they can be effective. The last thing I'll add too is be open to conversations and find out what they're struggling with and what they're afraid of. Because the traditional models of here's what a leader is may not work now. And so how can we help them openly say what's going on for them, but then support them in a way that they don't feel made wrong in the process?
Excellent points. And that lets me ask Whit the follow-up question. And then I'm going to check in with Melissa and Karin, see if they want to add something to this conversation as well. So Whit, you mentioned something, you gave a great example that, in what I heard was you're role modeling an integrated life, right? And in role modeling an integrated life where you both care about success at work and you care about your life outside of work, you're giving permission to everybody who you work with to think in the same way and to learn from you around those days when it works well and the days when it doesn't work so well, And so one question that I have for you is sometimes remote work can mean for people that work is starting to spill into our lives a little bit more than we want because heck, our office is at home. Our mind is on the next work problem. Have you learned any skills around how to kind of like turn off work and get back into life?
I have, through trial and error. Mostly I've learned what not to do. And you're right, this does tie into what Christopher was just talking about, in that those conversations that are happening, I often try to be as visible as possible in those conversations, so that uh, you're to lead by example. I want people to see that I struggle with this, or that there are questions that other people may have. And that certainly applies to how to balance. We're a 24/7 team, and we're entirely remote, and we stay communicated by our phones. We use Slack. Some people might use Teams, whatever it might be, some equivalent of that. So on one hand, I'm always at work. And one of the things that I had to figure out early on was that this remote work allowed me the opportunity to be home with my family. And I wanted to make sure that my kids were still getting a quality of my time, not just the quantity of my time. And so finding those boundaries and being firm within reason. Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule, and that flexibility is key. But having a set work schedule, as I said, I'm a 24/7 team. Technically, I don't have 9 to 5 set schedule, but I do have a schedule that most people recognize, that they know I'm going to be here from this time to that time, more or less. I can certainly come on before or after as needed. But I have personally, I very family first in my communication with the company, as is the company. I'm very fortunate is receptive to that, and built on that, frankly. And so the conversations that we have, the underlying assumption is family first, and people will never question that. Obviously, there are projects at work that may take a little extra time here or there, and sometimes you have to do things that you wouldn't in your day to day. But I guess what I've learned, to come full circle on this rambling answer to your question, is just keep talking until somebody asks somebody else something, and then and then you're off the hook.
Whit, that's a really great example of, people learn from both what's working and what's not working. And boy, do I use that in my role modeling all the time. Melissa, I'm sure, could share quite a few examples of how I do that. But anyways, Melissa, what would you like to add when you've heard this conversation so far, kind of thinking about all the different things we've been touching on today?
I just want to echo the importance of both a trusting environment, and that it's okay to make a mistake, and to say out loud that you've made a mistake. And I think there's a place for having high expectations in a workplace, and there's also a place to say, and the expectation is we're going to learn from a mistake. We're going to make mistakes. So I think the trust, the culture of trust, the culture of respect, and this idea that we're going to work together to solve a problem. It's fine. We didn't get it right that time. Let's go back to the drawing board, and let's try it again. I think that's huge.
Valuable, so valuable. Guess what? Guess that really helps at home too, not just at the workplace. Wonderful, terrific. That's what we learned. As we become integrated people, a lot of the things that we learn at work help us at home, and the things that help us at home help us at work. It's really kind of amazing. Karin, any thoughts that you're kind of hearing a theme, or something you want to underscore from today's discussion?
Yeah, I mean, what Christopher said around the leadership qualities that you need kind of to advance that next level was a good point of inflection, but also then what Whit then said next, which was, at least what I took out of it was, he's very clear about his values. That is a extremely compelling leadership quality. He's also willing to be vulnerable, relatable, and visible with the struggles he has as a person. People underestimate how incredibly compelling that is in a leader, and how it makes people not only follow you, but champion your success. And they feel then supported to come and tell you when that things aren't going so well. So, I mean, all of the things that Christopher was saying, I felt like Whit just, really demonstrated.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's that learning isn't relationship skills are the art of leadership. That is what makes somebody stand out. And those skills are so critical. They are the skills that will take us through AI. So.
Yes, yes. All right. Well, we're going to make Christopher and Whit feel even better in a second, because where we're moving to is the idea that, you can really become a more engaged father because we've normalized flexibility and hybrid and remote work. There's no more special requests to be able to be flexible. Instead, it's everybody has a life and everybody wants to do a good job at work. And so you figure out solutions for everybody to make it work. But before we hear from Christopher and Whit about how this has helped them be engaged fathers, this flexibility and hybrid and remote work, I wanted to hear from Karin, because I think a really important point from people to think about is this is not just about being a better dad. This has a huge impact on moms as well. Karin, you might have a recent story that's kind of illustrated some of this.
Yeah. So as a full-time person running a family business, and my husband being a full-time federal employee, we have gone through lots of seasons of our life and family. But we've really always made intentional decisions to try to manage what was happening. And for a long time, my husband had flexibility in his job. A compressed work week when he first started that job meant he had every other Friday off. So when our kids were really little, he could spend the Friday with our baby, and we could save a day of childcare. But it was also relieving for me. It was one less thing I had to manage, less invisible tasks, and that also helped him feel more engaged at home. So I wasn't fielding all the invisible tasks. 2020 comes, he comes home, he's totally remote. So am I for a while, but I run an apartment management company. That is not always a remote job. And so having him here while our kids were working, at home, and just being able to walk the dog on his break was really helpful. This year, the federal government called everybody back to the office full-time, 5 days a week, no accommodations whatsoever. And it overnight changed our lives. And I wasn't the only one. So I saw this LinkedIn post of a mom who said basically, like, overnight, our sharing the load, years of sharing the load, is gone, and now it's all falling to me. And that's been my situation for, the past couple months. As we're recording this in May, we've now been living in that situation for 4 months or so. It's dramatically changed things for me as a parent, as a working parent. I mean, I'm fielding everything, and we're also in elder care, and our kids have lots going on. It's been really difficult. It's meant that I've had to then make compromises for my own job and work.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, one of the things we really teach people is no matter what your family construct is, whether you're 2-dad family, 2-mom family, whether you're divorced but sharing care, whether you're a single parent but you have extended family helping out, it is a family systems solution. And so everybody's piece impacts everybody else's piece. And the more we can have those families think together about the best solutions, the better and more diverse solutions we can solve. Wow. Okay. So you're getting the picture that this is an everybody issue and we're all interconnected. And the more we can have flexibility, it really has a positive impact in our organizations, in our families, in our communities. This is a really powerful thing we want to hold on to and keep on making happening for generations to come. Whit, you've been this amazing dad. You watched your kids grow up faster than you could ever imagine. How has hybrid and remote work been part of that solution?
It's been everything. I have had the opportunity, prior to the work that I do now, the company that I'm with now, I was my own boss. And when I made the decision to join a workforce that was going to hold me more accountable than I was possibly holding myself, one of the biggest considerations was, how is this going to impact the relationship with my family and what has become our routine, a routine that included I walk my kids to school every single day. I had the opportunity to go on every field trip. These are things that most parents, especially dads, but certainly most parents don't have the opportunity to participate in that sort of thing. And not only did I have that opportunity, I built my life on it. That was the way that things worked for us. So moving into a job that expected me to be at meetings at certain times and do things that I wasn't used to, the fact that it was remote out of the gate was huge. And of course, there's still you still have to work with that and make it work to fit to what it is that you're doing. But I know we mentioned flexibility earlier, but it's just having that option is such a peace of mind for us. And I am very aware that that is not a situation that a lot of people have access to, and I wish that they did, because I can't imagine it any other way.
Yeah. Thank you for that very authentic, inspiring story, really. And I know you well, and I know how much this is all so true. And again, it's just so amazing because, then our kids grow up, but care keeps on happening, the elder care, our own care, our kids still need us. This is a life cycle solution. So, Christopher, what can you add to that around men and remote work and flexibility?
Yeah, I just want to put a big +1 to what Whit said as well. When I was working in organizations, one of the things I would look at is what's their approach to supporting parents. And I say parents, not just moms, because in this country, a lot of the time that's where the focus is. So big +1 to that I would make it a priority, and I would look at what is their, what are their willingness to work with me if I've got to take my daughter to school or things like that. The other thing I want to add as well is I think for organizations, it's important for them to start to look at how are they viewing fathers looking to take time off to do parent care, elder care, all those things. Because if you look at a lot of men and ask them why they're not taking time off to do those things, often the responses are around they don't feel safe, or it might impact their opportunity for promotion or advancement. And particularly in case where they may be the primary breadwinner, it makes them not feel safe. I just want to put in a plug for a book called All In by Josh Leves. He published it several years ago, but he does a lot of research around this and looking at how the lack of paternity leave here in the US really impacts all of us, not just men. And so I think if we can help organizations start to shift how they look at men wanting to take time off to be caregivers and things like that, that can have a big influence on things changing too.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I have a really quick last question for Whit, and then a very last question for Melissa. Whit, so can you be a dad and a leader and have time for family?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we also need to change our understanding of what it means to be a leader. And it really isn't a work or life approach. There can be a work and life approach to becoming a wonderful leader. All right, Melissa, thank you for all that you do to make ThirdPath possible. As you've been listening into all this wisdom, what's one last idea you have?
I would share, because we've shared a lot of personal stories, our family also functions the way it does because of the flexibility that both I and my husband have. And we are butting up against a situation at this point where he is being asked to come back to work 3 days a week. And what I am struck by in this conversation is how in our family, and because of my husband's workplace, I've taken for granted that when he makes the request, that I'm hoping is going to happen. But when he makes the request for flexibility, we're not looking at it as something unusual, that it is the father in the family who's making the request. It hasn't even dawned on me over these past few weeks as we've been struggling through it to think, oh, this may not be approved or may not be seen as okay, regardless of what the procedural approval is. There's not going to be a stigma issue, because this is the dad in the family asking for the exception. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think, I know this is not yet the rule. This is not totally the exception to the rule either. And I'm grateful for the fact that the needle has moved on this. And at least, in this particular workplace, this is going to be a request that's okay. And nobody's going to look at it and say, he can't.
Yeah.
It's the mom who should be flexing, not the dad.
Yeah. Amen. That we have had, the needle has moved. A needle still needs to move some more, and the needle has moved. Well, all right. So for those of you who are listening in, we've got one more exciting thing for you. So stay tuned, because we wanted to end this podcast with was an example of an amazing leader who said, hey, the pandemic taught me I can do things differently. And now he's just this great example of a hybrid worker who's done a great job building connection, mentoring, work distribution. So stay tuned and listen to that exciting story. And last but not least, I want to remind you, and what you've been hearing, these answers aren't just good for our workplaces. These answers are good for our families. And on our next podcast in June, we're going to be really taking a deep dive into how we can really support our families. So glad you guys are a part of our conversation today. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I promised you that I had a great story to share. And this particular story is with Greg Beecher. He's the Director of Talent Development at Virginia Tech. And I think what his story represents is the opportunity of really thinking differently. And you're going to see that Greg really is someone who worked one way before the pandemic and now has kind of really seen the light about how we can do things differently today. So Greg, you have a small team and you've learned a lot about how we can do work today. In fact, you were telling me how at one point you thought, well, we should all be in the office on Wednesdays. But given the work you do and the fact that people have schedules where they have to work around client needs, you've really learned that wasn't a good approach and that there was a better approach where, yes, you needed regular time to meet, but doing it virtually allowed more flexibility in people's schedules. And so now your approach for your team is that they need to be 3 days at some point in the office, not necessarily the same days, and 2 days they can do remotely. And so everybody can have a different approach to which days they pick. Yours happen to be Thursday and Friday. But again, you've organized the work around how you do your work. And so, for example, on a day like today, when you knew that you had to actually be in the office on one of your remote days, you switched things around. So what I love about your story is you said, let's put the work first in designing our solution. But let's not forget that we need to build connection and a strong sense of community in our team to do our work well too. Tell me a little bit about how you're building connection with your team.
Oh, I'd love to. It's really been interesting that when we're meeting, so we meet every 2 weeks through Zoom. And doing that has enabled us to actually share resources better. And we'll start off our conversations with what's a kudos and gratitude. And that was kind of foreign to them at first, but that's kind of an expectation on them. And it helps us to get grounded that life is life. And it helps us to be able to understand that we are working as individuals, as human beings. And so that's been a valuable point. When we do our in-person half-day strategy meeting, we call it, we actually make sure that we have opportunity to celebrate, to socialize, and that's been also part of our community building. It's a value that we actually put into what we call our rules of engagement, that we have any reason to celebrate with cake. And so that's part of our community building. I'll also say that we use Microsoft Teams, and so the chat is constantly going. So the dialogue that we might have had in person doesn't stop just because we're not there in person, or some might be, right? Like today, there's someone in the office while I'm remote. And I just sent them a message. Can someone go to the mailroom and pick up our marketing supplies? Because we need those to be inventoried and get ready for this event. So it is an opportunity for us to engage in multiple ways. It's not strictly by medium, it's by choice.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and actually, I mean, I think you also talked about something where you have some norms around how to set up schedules to begin with. So everybody's very transparent in how they approach their work. Tell me more about how you do that.
Yeah, so we have what's called a flexible work agreement. It's really a tool that our division helped build that we can say, this is my norm of when I'm going to be in the office and when I'm going to be remote. For our team, I said, add to that form that it's flexible based on client demands. So we have an agreement. We can go back to it if someone seems to be violating it, which tends to be some supervisors and leaders' concerns, is that, oh, they're going to take advantage of this. On occasion, right? We have to change things. And even our vice president knows that. So having just clarity and communication with expectations is, I think, an important thing to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, whether people work on site or work hybrid or work remotely, there's a small percentage where there's a bad apple. And so this
That's
kind
right.
of transparency helps it makes it very clear what's expected and to be addressed, the small minority of people, but it happens where there is a
Yeah.
problem.
Yep.
Now,
Exactly.
you've done something, and I want to make it very transparent in this conversation. You get together regularly, but how often is that? Because it's not all the time. Tell me more about how often you get together.
It's once a month for about a half day. And
Mhm.
I'll usually, we on our campus, we have a hotel, and we are able to actually book meeting space at that hotel that enables us to utilize it. So it's once a month. We get together, there's snacks provided, and it's simple.
Yeah. Although I think one time I remember you telling me that you thought it was fun to have everybody come to your house for lunch. Did that happen?
I did. They all came to, we actually did, it was kind of a longer strategy session that they came to my house. I provided lunch. It was a good celebration, good time to just be more normal, if you will.
Yeah. And again, I think that we all work better when we have strong connection. Again, whether it's
Yes.
on-site, hybrid, or remote. And you've just gotten so creative in how to build connection. That little touch point at the start of virtual meetings, physically getting together once a month as a way to really brainstorm together in a thoughtful way. There's just so many ways you're building strong connection with each other. It's lovely. How do you understand what people are working on? How did you distribute work? And how do you avoid or help them if they're going through a period of episodic overwork?
Sure. It's a great question. So one of the things I think it starts with is with the position description. How are we clearly defining roles and expectations? Ironically, part of our team is also responsible for the performance management of our university, all of our employees. So part of what we're also looking at is what are we doing for ourselves with those expectations? That's where it comes into. So our half day or our 2 hour, hour and a half, whatever it comes out to be, bi-weekly meeting is really exploring what are the clients we're working with, what are hot topics that we have, what's happening with that. Our strategy meetings then dive deeper into what people are doing in projects and that they're leading and trying to empower. And I empower them to say, all right, this is your project. You're going to report out on this. Then between their strategy meeting and our bi-weekly meeting, we're doing our data collection. What's happening? How are we're doing that? So it's really about having a conversation about the progress people are making. I do meet with them one-on-one as well, each team member. I try to do that in person, but if it doesn't happen in person, I have a Zoom link set up for that as well. And then that's where we get into the nitty-gritty about what are the challenges that they're having. We can talk about that as a group if they want to. And our team is very, I would say, cohesive. And they'll sometimes talk about that. But through the one-on-one, I'm trying to make sure that that expectation is fulfilled, that they are also getting the latitude that they need to say, I need help here.
Okay, so you used to do work a certain way. It was much more you going into the office. In fact, we'll get to this in a little bit, but kind of some traditional roles at home where your wife became the person who did more of the flexing around some of the things that happened. You also had in-laws that helped out. So you had kind of a more traditional approach to work. Along came the pandemic, and here you are, really doing things so differently. When you think about your whole university and the leaders in your university, what have you learned that's really useful that you would like them to learn about or other leaders to learn about?
Hmm. I think what we're talking about is respecting the human being and their own lives. That's huge. That's really crucial because I think we're seeing a new generation rise up of having different expectations. They've seen the difficulties of life in our world and they're like, I don't want to live that way. And I respect that. And I think that's an opportunity for us to understand how do we integrate more well-being and balance, so if in between meetings, if I throw a load of laundry in the washer, that's one less chore I have to do tonight, right? That's the benefit of it, and to recognize that is how we live and can live. So having conversation, again, the communication is really a crucial piece to this, but having conversation of expectations both ways is how we navigate the I think success for our workplace.
And did the workplace lose in this approach?
No, I don't think so. I think we've gained some uh, awareness of people who still don't understand how to function with that, but that's why we keep talking about it. That's why we hold steady in making this. I think it's actually gained wellness because what I see is and hear outside my office is the more conversation when people are in there. I'm hearing the conversation that's not new. It's just a continuation of what started over Zoom, chat, and otherwise.
Yeah, The more we can kind of really help people be whole self, that bring their whole selves to work, they are more engaged, they bring their well-being to both their work and their lives. There's just so many positives for workplaces to get this way. Wonderful. So flipping to the last question.
Yeah.
Here you have, you're watching your children grow up. You have a
Mhm.
couple who are off to college. I know young parents listening to this can't imagine children growing up. That's the truth. But when
Yeah.
you think about young men in particular today, and you think about those young men who want to become, good at their jobs and great fathers, what advice do you have for them?
I think you have to recognize who is your community, and do you have them solidified to be that support system, and then how is that being translated? What are the pits and the valleys and the mountaintops that you're sharing? And with that then comes an understanding not just of your personal life but your work life. What are those challenges that you're experiencing there? So that's really crucial, and to hold to those values, to understand that there are opportunities. I have a business developer friend who is been working on a plan for about 15 years, and he's coming to the head of that being successful. And what's interesting is that his original thought was, well, I need people to come to Arizona where the business is located, and I need them to work here. He has changed in the last couple of years, his whole mindset, like, yeah, it doesn't matter anymore. Maybe these few positions because of regulations need to be here in Arizona, but I'm okay with people being remote. And in fact, it's going to expand the recruitment model. So there are opportunities for those young families, those young parents, to be able to have a balance. And that's what it's about. I'm going to correct myself on one thing, is that because I think our wellness team has really driven into my head, is that we get this idea that balance is really part of what we're doing, work-life balance. They use this term work-life harmony, and it really
Mm.
says you don't have to sacrifice something for another. So I think that's a really crucial point to take.
I love that. So young men today should be thinking ahead about work-life harmony, which means in the old days, work became the defining part for them. And
Yes,
going ahead, it can be the idea that work is part of a whole that can really mean really building a partnership with whoever you are sharing family responsibilities with, and how that fosters a great connection with your partner, and how it really, by creating that harmony, you can have a very different relationship with your children all the way through their childhood, and into their young adult lives. So
absolutely.
thank you,
Absolutely.
Greg. Thank you for being a role model for what we can keep on reaching for.
Glad to help, Jessica. Thanks for the time together.
Want more ideas and support? Look for lots of free resources on our website, or continue today's conversation on our Facebook group, the ThirdPath Collective, or follow us on social media. As you can see, our nonprofit has been successfully growing an inspiring community of role models and change agents. Help us expand our reach and support these free resources by making a donation today through our website.